A little bit, I mean, he has to go through the concussion protocol. Probably at this point, it's at least a 72-hour injury, so to speak. So he's going to be gone for a little while. But if you're going to have this stuff happen, you want it to happen in camp. And I think it just relates to the way Kiko plays, and I think Eagles fans are going to love him because he goes 100 miles an hour at all times. We always talk about Chip Kelly. There's no tackling in camp. Well, Kiko Alonso never got that memo. He's going 100 miles an hour all the time, and that's one of the reasons he got banged up. But yeah, as I said, if it's going to happen, you want it to happen early in camp, and hopefully he'll be able to get squared away and get back into things relatively quickly.
You flip over to Murray. He has now missed 2 out of the 4 practice. He admitted that he's not. Wasn't happy the first day. He wasn't so sure about why he sat out, but now an illness, the reason. Do you think him sitting out these days is any problems for him?
No, I think it's, it was a hydration issue on the opening day of camp, and, that's part of the sports science stuff that Chip brings to the table. So DeMarco's got to learn to drink more water, I guess, before he can get out on the field. But, if you think about how many times he touched it last year in Dallas, this might be, a good thing in the long run because you want him ready week 1. I always said, and we talked about it with Sam Bradford, when everybody was so concerned, was he going to be able to work in team drills on day 1 of training camp? I've said since day 1, who cares? As long as he's ready week 1 of the NFL regular season. Similar take on DeMarco Murray. I mean, I want him put in the bubble wrap. If you see what the Vikings have done with Adrian Peterson for years, I think it's been 3 or 4 years now, they haven't even let him carry the football in the preseason. They don't care, and I think the Eagles should take a similar tack with a player like Murray, who took so much wear and tear last season in Dallas.
John, I want to, touch on a couple things with this team moving forward. Number one, Bradford said he feels better than he was expecting through the early days at camp. He said, I thought my knee would hold up, but I wasn't sure. He admitted that, but he says it feels great right now. Has he exceeded maybe your expectations of covering them through minicamp and the OTAs and now seeing him in at training camp? Does he look like, man, he's made a lot of progress from, a month ago?
Yeah, he's not hobbling around. He was hobbling around noticeably in some of the OTAs at times, and obviously wasn't able to work in team drills. And he was there day 1. And I think the most impressive thing, he's been up and down. I thought he was particularly bad when they had the open practice at the link, but throwing the football. But the thing that's encouraging to me is he's been there for every practice. They haven't scaled things back. They haven't said after he worked hard one day, all right, let's limit his repetitions the next day. I thought you'd see some of that as we went through camp, and he's been able to go. And I think that's the most encouraging thing of all. Just the fact he's been able to be there, and he's been able to do all the work that they've given him.
Obviously, when Tim Tebow's on your team, there's some interest around him. I know. The other day at that open practice at the link, about 20,000 people there, about 19,000 of them seemed like they were there for Tebow. Has he impressed enough to say, what, this guy legitimately is going to be sticking around here? A lot of people think he was just kind of here and would be gone, but has he improved enough to say that he's got a shot?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got a shot. I've always thought he had a shot to be the third-string quarterback just because I don't think Chip Kelly's enamored with Matt Barkley at all, so he's got a better skill set in theory for the read option offense, and you would figure if there is one offense he could fit in, it would be this one. But as far as being a contributor, I've never thought that was a possibility. And if he does have to play, it would be in a disastrous type situation. You'd be talking about injuries to both Sam Bradford, Mark Sanchez, if he makes the team. He had 2 of the best throws I've ever seen him back-to-back today at practice. He threw a deep out to Corin Pratt and then a wheel route to Raheem Mostert. But, every once in a while, and that's what gets people excited, but there's no consistency. And it all stems back to his mechanics. And they're so inconsistent. His throws are inconsistent. That's what happens. That's why, quarterback coaches always harp on mechanics, always harp on doing things the same way over and over and over again for whatever reason. And it's certainly not work ethic, because nobody works harder than Tim Tebow. Whether it's muscle memory, he can't break it. It's just mechanics remain poor. He's got that elongated throwing motion we've all known since, day one that he's arrived, and his footwork has always been shoddy, and I haven't seen much of a difference as far as that goes.
John McMullen is with us here. Today's pigskin.com. You can read this interesting piece on Chip Kelly. We know, Brandon Boykin was traded last week, and on the way out the door, he, indicated or insinuated there might have been some race issues. You write a piece about what Chip Kelly's real problem is, and can you describe that to the listeners?
Well, I think, it all harkens back to the fact that Riley Cooper is the one, elephant in the room, and people have kind of used that one move as an excuse to put the racist stuff in the conversation. But, I think a number of the African-American players on this team, I think they don't relate to him. I think that's what Brandon Boykin was trying to say. I don't necessarily know if that's fair. I don't think it was fair of Brandon Boykin to say everyone of our culture and put everyone in a similar boat, because there's obviously players on this team, who have bought into what Chip Kelly's trying to do. D'Amico Ryans, Malcolm Jenkins, players like that, who take it on roles as team leaders. So I think that part of it's unfair, but perception is greater than reality often. And Chip Kelly, he's got to realize this perception is out there, at least amongst certain players in his locker room. And, he's kind of a weird guy. He's not really a social guy. He doesn't interact with people like, you and I might or other people might. And it's an issue. And he's got to find a way to overcome it somehow and connect with some of these players.
John, I want to get into the wide receiver stuff, because he said today that Aguilar is not here to replace Jeremy Maclin. And obviously, at this point, it seems like from the reports out there that Huff has been running with the ones more so than Aguilar. I don't know that you can read a lot into that. But how do you look at the Eagles wide receiver position so far in camp? Does this look like an upgraded unit, or are there some legitimate questions about the depth and talent there?
I'm very concerned, and I'm surprised more people aren't, because, there's a lot of youth and there's a lot of players who might have, particularly high ceilings, but there's not a lot of experience and there's not a lot of production. What they've done, basically the first team has been Riley Cooper, Josh Huff, as you mentioned, on the outside, and Jordan Matthews in the slot. And Matthews has looked great, but one of the things that is strange to me is, for whatever reason, Chip Kelly and the offensive coaching staff have pigeonholed him as a slot receiver. He never moves outside. It's just strange. And the fact that, I like Nelson Aguilar. I think he's ahead of the game when it comes to route running, and I think that's always important for a rookie receiver in this league. But if anyone thinks he's going to be the next Odell Beckham Jr., I don't see that. So I think they're going to have some growing pains at the wide receiver position unless somebody like Huff can come out of nowhere and become a top-tier outside receiver. And to count on that is just not a good way to go about things, in my opinion.
How do you see Ertz mixing in here? I know they like Selleck, but do they almost have to put that aside and give Ertz more time? If there's concern, as you said, about the wide receiver position, doesn't he almost need to be on the field more?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, every day Zach Ertz makes at least one great catch, and you can see his ability as a receiver, and he's got a chance to be one of those tight ends we always talk about that are sort of the hybrids that are those difficult mismatches for defensive backs or linebackers. He could be that guy. But, again, he's been pigeonholed because he's not a good blocker. Similar situation to Jordan Matthews. Similar situation to Brandon Boykin, why he's not here. He's pigeonholed as a slot cornerback. That's one of the questions I have about this coaching staff. Obviously you have a desire that you want for each position in your head, but, it's not reality to think you could be there at every particular position, so you have to utilize the strengths of the talent you have on hand. And to me, not having Zach Ertz on the field when you don't have proven receivers, that's a bad way to go about things. And you're going to have to make do and understand he's never going to be a true Y-back or that old-school tight end like Mark Bavaro who can block and catch. He's a great receiver, and you're going to have to mask his blocking deficiency.
In your opinion, John, you've seen Maxwell. He's got size. He's got a lot of what the Eagles did not have last year, that physicality on the corner. So far, are you buying into what they spent on him?
Well, I'm buying into him being a big upgrade, and I'm buying into him, being a very good player in this league. My concern is that he's never going to live up to that contract, and other players around this league have imploded under those kinds of expectations. So that's my concern. He's not Richard Sherman. He's not Darrelle Revis. He's not a top 5 cornerback in this league. What he is significantly better than Kerry Williams or Bradley Fletcher or Brandon Boykin for that matter. So it's a huge upgrade, but when people look at what he's paid, and we've seen it in this city over time, they look at what you're paid and expect you to be Richard Sherman. So I don't know if he can live up to the expectations, but he's certainly a big upgrade.
There's so many different things going on up there. I think this is a really interesting camp. But do you notice, John, you've been there all 3 of Chip Kelly's years, do you notice a different atmosphere here? Because I ask that because, there are guys like Boykin and McCoy and Jackson and McMullen that are gone. Are those guys gone? The perception was to some, well, if they didn't want to be here, they weren't the right kind of guys, so he got rid of them. Do you notice a different atmosphere at the NovaCare Center?
No, because it's always been a group of so-called team leaders that kind of take over things, and they've always been the same. It's always been D'Amico Ryans. It's always been Jason Kelsey. It's always since he's been here, it's always been Malcolm Jenkins, players like that and guys like Shady, and obviously we're never in that group, and they are what they are. I think you look at all Chip Kelly's moves, and if you take them out and just look at them individually, they make a lot of sense. I think he's telling complete truth when he says LaShawn McCoy was not the type of runner he wanted. He wants a one-cut-and-go guy. I think that's the truth. I think he was concerned about Deshaun Jackson's limited ability to do certain things as a receiver because of his size, and you see it by the way he runs his team. The same thing happened with Boykin. I mean, Boykin was a better cornerback than Bradley Fletcher, but he just didn't have the size to play on the outside, according to the Eagles coaching staff. I don't necessarily agree with that kind of stuff, but that's how Chip runs things.
When they they didn't make the hire yet, but what Jeffrey Lurie had said, the next guy, we want to be innovative. We want him to be 5 years ahead of the curve. So 3 years in now, do we think there's more to come from Chip Kelly? Is there another layer from him that we haven't seen?
No, I think you what you see is what you get now. You know what he is. I mean, he'll talk. I always talk about his contradictions, so never listen to what he says. Just look at what he does. And, for instance, he would always say he would morph his offense around certain quarterbacks. He really doesn't. He runs the same, fake read option, whether it's Nick Foles, whether it's Michael Vick, whether it's going to be Sam Bradford, Mark Sanchez, Tim Tebow, whoever. He's going to run the same offense. So I think the innovative stuff is the off-the-field stuff, the up-tempo mentality, the sports science, all that kind of thing. I think X's and O's standpoint, I think you see what he wants, and both offensively and defensively, and I don't think that's changing because that's what he believes in.
John, I want to get a couple thoughts on the NFC East teams here. McFadden, there's a lot of reports out there that, he's always banged up, but hamstring problems, frustration building out there. Dunbar. How come Murray leaves and people don't think that offense is going to have some problems because of it?
Well, they're crazy. I mean, that's the only explanation for it. The guy rushed for 1,800 yards, and I've never seen anybody rush for that many yards and be insulted so much, whether it's Joseph Randle, talking about him leaving meat on the bone, Emmitt Smith saying he would have got 2,500 yards. That's absurd. Yeah, the Cowboys had a great offensive line, especially run-blocking offensive line, but they also had a great running back. And they're going to see how difficult it is to replace an 1,800-yard runner, because unless you have Adrian Peterson, I don't know too many people who can do that on a consistent basis.
That's an interesting and it's funny because I know running back's a spot. Ray Rice is out. Forsett, a guy that, didn't have a lot of fanfare, comes in, has a great season. I think it's a position where you can find talent and you can replace, but you're right. It seems like a guy who had 1,800 yards in the style that he had, that the Cowboys just feel like they can just plug some random guy in there and get similar production for that offense. You're putting a lot, in my opinion, then on an aging quarterback who I like Romo more than other people do, but I think that's a lot to put on a guy who's had some back issues, and without that 1,800-yard hammer, I wonder if he can make it through a season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'm in that camp too. I think Tony Romo's a lot better than people think he is. But the Cowboys turned a corner last year because they became a run-first versus a pass-first team. And that made things so much easier on Tony Romo, the fact that they had that hammer in the backfield, as you spoke about. And not only that, it also helped that defense, because that defense is not talented. It certainly wasn't last year. They've made significant upgrades, but it's still not one of the better defenses in football. So the fact that he could move the chains and control the clock, it meant so much to the Cowboys. I think it's a big issue. And Joseph Randle said Darren McFadden's certainly not going to be a replacement. And again, you're right. You can get people like Justin Forsett who can run for 1,200 yards behind a great offensive line, something like that. But there's a big difference in this league between 1,200 and 1,800, and that's rarefied air. And that's where DeMarco Murray was last year.
It's interesting because last year, entering the year, people thought their defense would be historically bad. Did they exceed expectations? Were they not counted on as much as we thought? Do you think they take a step back defensively?
The Cowboys, I think they get a little bit better simply because they have upgraded. When Greg Hardy gets on the field, that's a legitimate, whatever you think of him as a human being, he's legitimately one of the best pass rushers on the planet. They've never had a player like that since, the wheelhouse of DeMarcus Ware. So that's going to be a huge upgrade when they get him on the field. Sean Lee's going to be back. We'll see. He was their best defensive player before the injury, but he's been injured so much he almost should be on the Eagles. So it's not like you can count on him. But you would think the upgrades talent-wise that they should be a little bit better. But no, if you look at the Cowboys and say expect them to be a top 10 defense, I don't see that at all. All
right, John, let me get a couple quickies in on the Giants here. Obviously, Jason Pierre-Paul looks like he's rehabbing down there in South Florida. Do you at this point think he is going to be able to help them?
Not for a long time. Certainly not early in the season. We'll see. It's pretty clear that they're more concerned with the thumb than the index finger being removed, because the thumb controls so much of your hand. And nobody knows at this point because, the Giants haven't been able to see him. And it's just it's a very, very bad situation. Now, they budgeted the money for him to be a franchise player anyway, and there's no other route they can go. So as an organization, they made the decision, they might as well play wait and see, because if he's able to get back to what he was, at least somewhat, to have a pass rusher like that is obviously very desirable in this league. So they're going to play the wait-and-see game. But I don't think they're going to expect much of them at all until the second half of the season. Is that?
Quick game for you here. Better year, Des Bryant or Odell Beckham?
Whew. Well, they're both going to have great years. So, I mean, that's one of the issues the Eagles have is that, that division. You can say it's, very poor defensively, but then you look at some of the receivers, and you're arguing, between maybe the best receiver in the game and maybe the second best receiver in the game, because I think Calvin Johnson's taking a step back. I think Des Bryant was the best receiver in football. The one question I have with OBJ is that, these hamstring injuries keep popping up, and I want to see him be on the field for 16 games. But obviously he's proven that he's so dynamic, and he's going to be tough to stop, and it's going to be there for a number of years. So it's going to be really difficult to handle either of them.
Bradford or Romo?
Yeah, I mean, Tony Romo is just so underrated. Tony Romo has been one of the best quarterbacks in this league for years and years and years, and to even at this stage put Sam Bradford in that conversation, I mean, you're wearing green-colored glasses because that's a stretch. I mean, for all the hatred, and he's aging, and the back injury could always pop up. But as far as production, those two aren't in the same sentence.
All right, just reeling everybody back in here for the day. All right, John. Go ahead, John.
I know I'll get killed for that, but it's just the truth.
John McMullen, he's got good stuff up at todayspigskin.com. You'll be hearing and seeing more from John here on 97.3. And, John, obviously, always a pleasure to catch up, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks, Mike.